Well, listen, everybody, this time is for you folks. So feel free to post questions in the chat or on my stream chat or in Discord in the thread. And we will try to answer them. Also, as you may notice, I'm flying solo today. Kit is traveling, so he will not be joining me. But hopefully we'll still be able to put together a nice office hours for all you folks and answer some questions. Philip has a question about effect.andThen, effect.flatMap, and effect.zipRight, and what the difference is between all of them. Valid question. Let me try to demonstrate. Let me open a playground. Share my screen. And then I'll zoom in. So let's take a look. So if we import from effect, we import effect. So the question was, what is the difference between effect.flatMap, effect.andThen, and effect.zipRight? And this is a good question because all of these combinators are sort of related to one another. And in fact, in effect v4, we've removed zipRight because its functionality is sort of encased within one or both of these combinators. But let's see if we can't do a quick example. So let's have a program. 42. It's a good number, right? And maybe we'll say, my number. So all three of these combinators are sequential, like kind of mapping, flat mapping combinators. So all of these are like sequential composition of effects. And what I mean by that is maybe we can start by looking at flatMap to understand this. But when you have an effect here, right? This is an effect that returns a number, never fails, never has any requirements. I think it's probably clear to most folks that flatMap allows you to take the result of one effect and use it to compute or create the next effect that you want to execute. So in this case, maybe we want to take my number and turn it into a string and then log it, right? So we could do my number.pipe, and these are all like pipe combinators. These are things that you would use like in a pipeline. So effect.flatMap. Now, if you look, we get an access to the result of the previous effect, which we know is a number. So we have inside this function, we have our number, and maybe we want to turn this into a string. So we could do, right? And flatMap is very similar to map in that both of these allow you to take the result of the previous effect and do something with it. Map allows you to return a value directly, whereas flatMap allows you to return an effect that does something based on this value. So here we're not really doing anything interesting. We're just making it a string, but we could do something interesting. We could like log it, like I said I was going to do. Promise, right? Effect.log. So this is an effectful operation, and this would not work in a map because we're doing something effectful here. Whereas map requires you to return the value, flatMap allows you to return an effect based on the result of the previous effect. And this is very similar to in generators, where if we wanted to compare effect.gen function, when we yield in a generator under the hood, let me just finish this off. When we yield in a generator like this is functionally equivalent to doing a flat map. Under the hood, this actually does do a flat map. Well, it does a little bit more than that, but it's basically just doing a flat map. under the hood. So it allows you to yield the success result of an effect and then do more stuff with it. The difference between these combinators is it lies in the details. And in theory, we could merge everything into andThen, but we decided to keep flatMap around because there are certain cases where andThen can't infer properly. So maybe we can just take a look at this. andThen allows you to do a bunch of different things in the same combinator. So first, andThen can be used as a direct replacement for flatMap. So this will work exactly the same. It allows you to take the previous result and return an effect based on that result. And you can see here we get the same log coming out. So andThen functionally equivalent to flatMap. But if we come in here and we look at all the overloads, there are a couple of different overloads in here. There is this second action, or the thing that you do inside andThen, can either be a constant value, similar to mapping directly to a constant. It can be a function returning a value. So this can also be a replacement for map, right? If we were to take this away and just return, this would work as well. It's just you can use it as a replacement for map. You can also return a promise directly in here. So you could do like promise resolve hello world, and this will work. You can have a function that returns a promise, and this will be fine. Like you'll get the result that you expect in here. If we inspect this result, probably should have started with zipRight, but you can see like there's a lot of stuff you can do with andThen, and if you keep reading through the docs here, you can do more stuff. Wait, I think I skipped the section. Here we go. So you can return a constant value. You can return a function that returns a value like map. You can return a promise. You can have a function that returns a promise. You can return an effect directly, and you can return an effect like flatMap. So andThen is pretty powerful. It can replace a lot of combinators, and it can be much clearer like what's going on in a pipeline. However, there are specific cases where andThen like can't infer types properly, which is why map and flatMap still exist in 4.0. In 4.0, zipRight is gone because it's kind of superfluous. But to finish answering this question, let's put these all next to one another. So this flatMap. So what is the difference with zipRight? All zipRight does, if we put andThen down here, effect.zipRight, it is a way to execute another effect after the first one. So first we want to execute my number, then we want to execute some other effect, like, I don't know, hello world, and basically discard the result of this. So we're saying it's the functional equivalent of flatMap. Oops. It's the functional equivalent of this flatMap and discard the result of the previous effect. So that's kind of like how all of these relate to one another. They're all sequential composition operators, but they have slightly different semantics. Most of the time, if you want, you can just use andThen, and you'll get pretty far. But there are cases where inference fails with andThen. And if you want to like start working towards future-proofing your code against 4.0 changes, then start moving away from zipRight and change your code to use andThen instead. Philip, does that answer your question? Kezin, you can still have the same semantics as zipRight, just use andThen instead. Like you would just change your code to this. Same exact thing. Yeah, and then if you look at the implementation under the hood, there's a lot of stuff going on. but yeah, like I said, there are very specific cases where inference doesn't work well because of all the overloads. Like TypeScript has a hard time picking the correct overload and whatever. So that's why map and flatMap still exist in 4.0. Philip, what? And then basically has try promise built on. Yes, yeah. It has a bunch of things built in. For working with third-party APIs, what is the effect recommended approach for calling endpoints? I'm using HTTP client from Effect Platform, but I've also seen HTTP API and request resolver. So request and request resolver is kind of like a level up from HTTP and HTTP API, or HTTP client and the HTTP API modules. Request and request resolver can be used to allow like batching and caching of effect results. And you can read about it on the website. There's a section called batching where it talks about like using request and request resolver. But that is kind of like a level up. It doesn't handle anything about HTTP for you. There's no like endpoints or anything like that. Let me just... For external endpoints, you can either use HTTP API or HTTP client. It depends on whether or not you want to generate like a type safe client yourself, or if you want to have it generated for you. So HTTP API is useful when you have a spec, like you know the spec for the API and you can plug in all the schemas and everything. It's especially useful when you control the API because you can define the spec for your API and then generate both an API and a client for it. But yeah, I mean, like if you look at the, let me share my screen properly. And if you look at the, I'm gonna zoom in. If you look at the code for like, for example, the AI packages, you'll see that in here, not here, the provider packages like OpenAI, the client. So the client uses HTTP client under the hood to like perform requests. And this is useful for like, again, I think it depends on like how specific you need to get. The utility is different. I think HTTP API is useful when you want to like spec out the endpoints in detail, whereas HTTP client is better for like kind of, I'll say on the fly requests, except it's not really like on the fly. It's like when you're just doing request response type stuff, I think HTTP client is enough most of the time, if that makes sense. But again, request and request resolver are a level up from that. So if you want to learn more about that, go to our docs and type in batching. And then you can read the whole section in the docs here. I'll pop this in the chat. And I'll pop it in my stream chat as well. Oh, go straight to my stream chat anyways. That like the request and request resolver, the utility is for abstracting the idea of like batching and caching requests. So you define like what your models are. So in this case, like you have your user model and your get user error, your to-do model and your to-do errors. And then you can define functions that actually interact with whatever API you want to interact with. In this case, I guess it's just a demo API. And you can see like some of these actually depend on other API methods here. And then you can use those API methods in your program. But the problem here is that, and like the docs kind of go over this, you end up with a lot of like n+1 problems here when you have operations that depend on one another. So the batching and caching is supposed to like help with that. So instead of declaring your model the other way, you would then additionally define requests for said models, where you define like what the request succeeds with and what the request fails with, using like the request module. And then you would define resolvers for your requests. And again, this is all in the docs, so I'm going over this quickly because I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but you would define resolvers using the request resolver module. And the purpose of these resolvers is to resolve requests. And if your requests can be batched, as in your API accepts like a batch of requests that it can resolve, you can create batched resolvers that will automatically batch requests, and then you can compose like higher order behavior on top of that. In 3.0, these APIs are a little bit hard to use, I think, personally. But in 4.0, we've made a lot of improvements to this whole system. So I think things are a little bit more semantic, and like make a little more sense when you actually try to use these APIs. Does that make sense, Jay? And while you're answering, let me see if there's any other questions. Cool. Very cool. Well, my other question is how to handle errors that may arise from the HTTP client. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Has been fun. HTTP client error is a union of response error and request error, and then each of those have 1 to 3 reasons, making it 6 errors in one. How do we narrow down the root cause? Well, I keep having to talk about 3 versus 4.0, but in 3.0, let's take a look. HTTP client error. So as Jay mentioned, the HTTP client has a specialized error module where you can either have an error that occurs during the request or an error that occurs during the response. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how you want to think about this, but the only way to discriminate between what's going on is to catch the tag for these. So in this case, you would catch either request or response error, and then you have to further discriminate on the reason. And because of the way that this is structured in 3.0, we don't really have a great way of providing type safe information along with, FYI, your mic goes crazy loud sometimes. Volume is not stable. Maybe it's because I keep moving closer and further away. Okay, I'll try not to do that. It's a new mic, so but yeah, there's not a really great way for us to, unless we like broke this out into like request transport error, request encode error, request invalid URL error, etc., etc. There's not a great way to continue discriminating on these reasons. But the downside of that being, you end up with the error channel like blowing up. Like you'd have like a request invalid URL error or request invalid. You get the idea. You'd have like 6 errors just from one HTTP client call. And then you can imagine if more of the effect modules start breaking these into individual unions, you end up with the same problem. The error channel just sort of explodes. So in 4.0, I'm experimenting with something related to this. This is kind of like a sneak peek, I guess, into like my thought process on how we expose errors from I'll call them like internal frameworks, but like when I say internal framework, I'm referring kind of like to, for example, like the CLI module or the AI modules or HTTP modules if we decide to continue like using this pattern there. I introduced this pattern, which I'm still not 100% sure on, but let's take a quick peek here. So I added to the effect module these three combinators called catch reason, catch reasons, and unwrap reason. And my thought process here is that when you have when you're trying to model the domain of a particular error, like AI error or HTTP client error, you don't want to explode the error channel, which we've already talked about. But you still want all of that information to be available to the end user. And you ideally want it to be type safe as the user discriminates on the potential error causes here, right? So what I kind of did here is I tried to get the best of both worlds where when you, for example, I'm using AI error here because this was kind of the impetus for this. But when you call an AI operation from effect, like generate text or something, your resulting effect would look like this. You'd have effect A and AI error in the error channel. But that AI error further has a reason field where you can have a bunch of different reasons. And I'll quickly show so far how many reasons I've added. Packages. Oops. Packages effect. Unstable AI. If we scroll all the way down, you'll see. Here we go. So AI error, like the structure of an AI error, is the module the error occurred in, the method. So you can still have properties on the parent error, but there's also this reason field. And this reason field is what contains like the granular error that actually occurred. And the purpose of these combinators, catch reason, catch reasons, and unwrap reason, is to allow you to catch the parent error and then further narrow on the reason. So like, again, if you're imagining like the AI use case, you call generate text, you catch AI error, and then you want to like do something if there was a rate limit error. This is like a kind of pattern that supports that. So it allows us to like expose that granular information that you're trying to get at without exploding the error channel on you, with like 20 or 30 different errors. I love this backport to V3, please. We're not introducing new features into V3 anymore. We're trying to, or at least we're trying not to. We're trying to sort of kind of feature freeze V3 a little bit. V4 when? Soon. Very soon, I think. I'm not going to say, but very soon. And then, we can add more combinators if this pattern sort of catches on within effect, but the idea, you can use catch reasons the same way you use catch tags, where you specify the parent error tag and then the individual reasons you want to catch. The only thing that's different about this is it's impossible to remove the reason from the error channel because, again, the effect error channel is AI error. It's not like the individual reasons. So even if you catch a particular reason, the AI error will still be in the error channel because you don't know if this reason was actually there or not. But to further like improve that UX, I added an unwrap reason combinator, which will take an effect that has an error with reasons in it. So in this case, AI error, and it will unwrap the reason into the error channel. So that is when, if you want to explode the error channel and get access to all the reasons and then catch them and eliminate them from the error channel, you would first unwrap the reason and then catch the individual errors. And one last improvement I'm thinking about making to this is when you're doing this, since we can't remove AI error from the error channel here, one last combinator I'm thinking of introducing in v4 is or die tag. So the idea being you would catch all the reasons you want, right? You would catch your rate limit error and your network error, whatever. But AI error is still in the error channel. And then to remove it, you could do effect.orDie tag AI error. And so any other reasons you didn't handle, you would die with, right? Because if you haven't handled them, you probably want to die like at that point anyways. So you have like a lot of control here. And again, we don't explode the error channel. So I haven't added or die tag yet, but I think I'm going to, because I think it further improves like this UX. So yeah. Anyway, I don't remember how I got on this topic. I think that, oh yeah, Jay had asked about like narrowing the root cause. So anyways, if more of modules adopt this pattern, I think it'll be easier for us to expose really granular information, because now you can see inside the effect like AI error module in v4, I can give a lot of information to the end user, right? Like I can tell you if you exceeded your context length, then you have access to all of this information. And every single one of these errors still has access to the HTTP related information if that error should have it, right? So like, for example, if you hit a context length error and you want to read a particular header, the HTTP context would have request and response details in it. So you could like read the request headers, read the response headers, and sort of like try to get at more of that information. Anyway, just trying to like make more improvements. Effect is supposed to be the best for error handling and everything. And I think our internal frameworks should reflect that, as well as like the apps that you guys build. So I think we can do a little bit better. And hopefully this like simple like reason convention will help with that. We'll see. Still sort of experimenting with it. Are there any TypeScript improvements in v4? On my code base, we recently added effect, and while I like the library, the TS performance took a hit and makes the dev a bit annoying sometimes. I tried TS-Go, but it doesn't really solve the issue, and I lose the TS effect LSP. Yeah, so while effect does leverage the type system quite a bit, usually if you encounter TypeScript issues, TypeScript performance issues after installing effect, it is sort of revealing a larger problem within your code base about related to TypeScript performance. And the reason why I bring that up is because our mono repository has hundreds of packages embedded in it. Maybe not hundreds, but like tens of packages with thousands of lines of code. And our our TypeScript performance, like in the editor, we don't have any problems. We've helped a lot of folks over the years with TypeScript performance and like done some consulting related to TS performance, but like generally speaking, it's less likely to be effect as the sole culprit, and more likely configuration issues within your own code base. For example, if you're using like a mono repository, you may want to consider looking into make incremental builds and whatnot. One thing that we've found helps for really large projects is when you start developing, to have TSC running in watch mode in the background, so that the DTS files are constantly being generated, which significantly helps like the TypeScript compiler because it doesn't have to generate them on the fly. Anyway, if you want more advice about TypeScript performance, feel free to like message in Discord and we can sort of chat. But it's while effect is very like leverages the type system quite a bit, we do take care internally to try to avoid introducing significant performance degradations related to our types. And splitting your project into packages, if you haven't, is definitely something you should consider, because then each package can be built independently. All right, let me see. If you had AI error type be generic over the reason, you could remove the reasons. Again, that only works until TypeScript expands the AI error reason type, which it can do. It can simplify that into the actual union when you do certain operations. So the second that happens, you lose the benefit of kind of like the opaque AI error type. Perhaps this has been asked before, but are there any plans to make Schema play nice with standard Schema? As it stands, my team is very reluctant. Whereas Rousey, we already in V3 have full support of standard Schema. In our Schema modules, you can take any schema. Can I use Zod with the effect HTTP server? I'm not sure what you mean. The HTTP APIs, no, they're effect schema specific. But if you want to use Zod to do like your decoding logic in your endpoints, sure. Like in the handlers. But we have full support for standard schema v1, like converting an effect schema to standard schema v1. Cross-posting my quick question from Discord thread. I have a weird question on how to automatically provide a layer to a program based on the current stage. I work on an app where the deployed environment uses a serverless database driver, but local database layer is different than the prod layer. Simplified example. Layer.suspend is fine, but like stage, I'm assuming stage gets set like either as part of the environment or during runtime. I don't know. But in that case, instead of using suspend, you could refactor this to do like layer.unwrap effect.gen. So let's just say like stage is an environment variable. I don't know. I need to import this. Hang on. And then let's grab this logic. Put it here. Get rid of this. So what unwrap effect does, layer.unwrap effect, is it allows you to take an effect that returns a layer and unwrap it into a layer. So like if you need to do effectful operations to compute which layer should be provided, this is one way to do it. You could unwrap this effect, the effect that returns a layer, into a layer itself. Does that make sense, Matt? Got it. And then providing database.default multiple times is still fine. Yes, because this layer will be memoized. The only time that it's not like, the only time that providing layers multiple times, sorry, let me rephrase. When you say providing database.default multiple times, what do you mean? Do you mean multiple times within the same layer graph, or do you mean to multiple programs? So no, if you provide multiple times, like if you do this, const effect 1 equals effect up. Let's get rid of all this like noise. Effect dot void dot type effect dot provide database dot default. Let me do this a second time. Let me yield. This is not okay. The reason why this is not okay is because you are effect.provide like builds the layer graph and then provides the resulting context to this effect. So here you would build your database layer twice. What you probably want to do if you can is compose your layer graph once at the root of your program. Sorry. Like this. And then these local provides would go away. And you would like provide it at the root. Yeah. If you're doing it as part of composition of main layer where database.default is like a dependency of 100 different layers in your layer graph, that's fine because database.default is memoized and will only be built once. The times where like you get into trouble with memoization is like, let's say you have something where you have to go like, if database.default was a function and you did like merge all layer dot pipe layer dot provide database dot default, and you did this multiple times in your layer graph, this is not okay. And that's because memoization of layers works by reference. So every time you call this function, you're returning a new reference. But because default up here is just a static variable, like this layer has a stable reference. So you can provide it as many times as you want. Yeah, unwrap effect is really useful. We use it a lot when you need to do like effectful ops to create a layer. Let me scroll up. I missed a bunch of questions. On error handling, Jay asks, I see the convention is to use schema.tagged error. However, if I want to treat a third-party JSON response as a tagged error, I can't because the third party obviously doesn't have the tag field. Yeah. There's a strategy for that in V3, and there's a better strategy in V4 that will be coming eventually. I'll answer Jay's question real quick, but let's just quickly from effect. So let's say you have, I don't know, external service error extends. Oh my God, I'm so bad with schema.error. Actually don't remember if I have to ask Julio if there's like a non-tagged error version of in V4. But what you could do is instead of making it a class, just make this a const, right? Have a schema.struct where, I don't know, error code. Internal service error. I don't know. Like you get what I'm trying to. This is the shape. Let's say this is the shape of your external service error, and you want to add a tag to it after it's been decoded. You would just do schema.add schema dot for where is it? What's the name of the method? Attach property signature tag external service error. And now we can show this off where we say decode sync external service error. code. All right, and if we look at what is unterminated string literal, you'll see that when it's decoded, then we attach the tag as a property signature, and in the resulting type that you get back, the tag will be there. You'll have this like in the type. And this is useful when you're externally, when you don't want to serialize the tag. Because again, if we go backwards and we let's do control. Let's just copy encode sync. So the encoded version has the tag on it, right? External service error. Oops. I keep. But when you encode it, it'll remove that property signature. So this attached property signature thing only affects like the decoded type, like the type side of the schema. In 4.0, there are better utilities for this. There's like a I forget the name of the method. Let me open up a window and go to small. I know this is small. Just give me 1 second. I will open a. I'll make it bigger in a second. Okay. Whoops. Schema.struct. So first of all, in effect 4.0, there is no tagged error. Export class my error extends schema dot. You'll see there is tagged error now. I guess it was added. Wait, am I in 3.0 or 4.0? So I don't know. Yeah, that is small squared, small in effect small. I don't know when tagged error was added to small. Before it was just error class, and you had to like manually add a tag field. But there's utilities like tag default omit, which is similar to tag but provides itself as a default when decoding and omits the value when encoding. So this would have will serve the same purpose as my error. I forget like the ID. How do I do this? Yeah, ID. Mattia LSP in effect small when. But anyways, in effect v4, you could do this, which omits. It's basically the same thing that I just showed you. So, okay, I'm getting very far behind on questions. Let me scroll back. You know what I don't like about Riverside is if I scroll back and somebody sends a message, it scrolls me to the bottom again. Resrazi, can I somehow push a Zod schema to HTTP endpoint to things like set payload and add success? No, at the moment they only support effect schemas. And that's because we track many more types than Zod does. And so we can propagate like effect requirements and things like that. We may extend the HTTP APIs in the future to support standard schema, like as input, but not for the moment. At the moment, it's just effect schemas. Yeah, Jay answered the question. V3 is only one way, schema to standard, not the other way. It would be nice if you could go the other way. Yeah, again, like we there's a lot more types that we have access to, so we can do a lot more like work for you to track things in the type system than what you have access to with standard schema. With standard schema, you lose a tremendous amount of type information. Hey, Bishop Roy. How's it going? Evan, how should I think about effects workflow and durable execution versus a heavyweight like temporal? When should I reach for effect cluster over temporal or other durable execution options? They're quite different in philosophy. Effects workflow and and clustering operates more as an actor system, whereas temporal has more of a request response model. I don't want to get too in the weeds. Also, I don't have a well formulated answer for when you should use one over the other. Obviously, I'm preferential to effect because I think if you're already working in TypeScript and all your models are in TypeScript and whatever, temporal's fine, but you do run into limits very quickly with different things in temporal that I haven't really run into as much with workflow and cluster. But I also haven't used workflow and cluster enough to formulate an educated response, which is why I've started streaming refactoring my Twitch integrations to effect and effect cluster. So if you haven't watched that stream, I'm sure it'll be on YouTube eventually, but I did my first stream on that on Monday, and I'm hoping to do a few every week. My thoughts as well, working with a team, effect is attractive, but it would be tough to sell to try to push this to our front-end engineers that are so accustomed to using Zod. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I certainly understand, and it's a change, but everything you can do with Zod, you can do with Schema and more. I'm gonna make a controversial statement and say that I think that effects, maybe not so controversial, but I think effect schema gives you a lot more power than you get with Zod to define your domain model. So, I'm sorry it took me so long to answer your question, Evan. I know you sent it a few times. How common or bad is it? I just lost to return a built service from a method instead of using layers. I did this here, for example. Let's take a look. Whoops. Playwright browser of. If your service needs to be built per request, then you don't really have a choice. If Playwright page has to be built per new page, then I don't really see I don't think you have another option. There's always tricks you could do, if you wanted to cache pages or things like that, but I don't know if that's what you're asking. Philip, just let me know. There isn't any schema in there. Yeah. And this one will be handled nicely with catch tags. Kevin, are you referring to the effect small one? In that case, yes. So if we say, I don't know, actually, let's just do this. Declare const foo effect never my error. So that's my problem. Oh, and you'll see it shows up here. Because again, the decoded type has tag. So if we look at export my error type, oops, let's just say my error type equals type of my error dot type. My error encoded. So you'll see the encoded version of my error in this case. The tag is optional. It's not required. It shows up in the type, but it's totally optional. If this doesn't exist, the schema will still pass. On the type side, you get like the instance of my error, which has the tag present on it. Because again, like the semantics here are that it provides itself as a default when decoding. So you get like the type here. But we lose the niceties of tagged error since this isn't a yieldable error or an instance of global error. No, that's not true. Schema.error class. Well, okay, fine. For the struct version, yes. That is true. Perhaps we can backport error class or similar to v3. But like there's been so much work done in Schema, like Schema under the hood, Schema in v4 is totally reworked, which enables like all of this powerful behavior. So I don't know if it's possible or not. Feel free to open an issue though, if you think it's useful in v3. Anyone on the team using Effect Cluster for production work? Is that a silly question? We have several companies that are using Effect Cluster in production successfully. And we work with them directly to address issues, give feedback, or receive feedback on features that would be useful, etc. And then we also run an effect cluster. It's not doing much right now, but we have an effect cluster running alongside our Discord bot. And I can't remember if we have any other clusters running ourselves. I don't think we do. If someone on the team is here and wants to contradict that, please feel free. I appreciate the sentiment, Kezin, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that about Zod. I think it's a very like useful project. I think that it's one of those things where if you like the simplicity and want that, then that's fine. I mean, Zod is great. Don't get me wrong. I just think that you get a lot more power out of effect schema. I was talking about v3. Yeah, I know, Jay. That's why I said if you want that to be available in v3, feel free to open an issue, and we'll see if. I know that Zod added codecs, but they're still not as powerful because with effect, transformations can be effectful. So you can leverage effect services and asynchronous operations in your transformations. Let me see if I missed anything. How can I hack HTTP API middleware to short circuit with specific responses? I need a lot more specific of a question for that. Like, I need an example. Sorry, cousin. Have you checked the docs? Because I'm fairly certain that it's in the docs. Packages. Let's see. HTTP API middleware. Okay, so schema that deprives any errors that the middleware might return. Blah, 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 blah. A Boolean to indicate whether the request should continue if the middleware fails. Okay. I wonder if actually. Yeah, here we go. So I don't know if this is enough for your particular use case, but like one thing you can do is when you have particular errors that arise, you can use HTTP API schema annotations to control things like the status code that's returned when this failure occurs. I think I'm not sure. Adding descriptions to security definitions. I'm not sure. I don't have enough deep knowledge of these APIs to know the answer to that question. But we can try to find it while there are no other questions. Let's see. HTTP API middleware. Let's see if sometimes I find that when I have a question about this, uh, I definitely think that LLMs are useful for answering questions about like the effect code base, especially because like as it grows, it's hard to keep the context in our heads ourselves. But like all the context in our head, I should say. But it can also be useful to just look at the source for certain things. HTTP. Excuse me. Any other questions? Did I miss any in Discord? Matt, I'm sorry I missed your question in Discord earlier. Also, let me just check. Diceco, thank you very much for the follow. I'm sorry I didn't have my Twitch stream open. But thank you for the follow, and thank you to anybody who followed me on Twitch. It is I really appreciate the support. So thank you, folks. Let's look at an example of an existing HTTP API middleware. Probably tag. HTTP API security. You know what? Let me look at middleware itself, because at some point you have to implement middleware. Where is it? Not the security ones. Here. This is the users group. Middleware implementation as an effect that can access the request context. Oh, sorry, Kai. Let me drop it in chat here. Which for anybody who wants to follow me for when I go live working on cluster stuff. Yeah, the problem with Riverside also is that if I log in as a host, I either show up as Kit, I show up as myself, I show up as whoever's registered as a host. It sends the message multiple times, which is interesting. No, unfortunately, Kit is not here today. He is traveling. Anyway, I forget who asked me the question about HTTP API middleware, but please feel free to post the question in the Discord channel, and one of us will respond. Maybe we can have Tim weigh in on that particular question. Any other questions that you folks have? Maybe we'll spend like the last 5 minutes looking at the some of the cool stuff we've added to the small code base. If nobody else has any questions. At the advice of my friend Tyler, we were trying to find a way to unify and get rid of all of like the different LLM configuration files. And RuleSync, which is a project from Dio. I'm going to butcher this, so I'm not going to say it. But this project kind of allows you to manage all the LLM stuff in your project from one place, which is really nice, including like the agent MD file and everything like that, which is really nice. And then like on install, when you run a PNPM install or something, I just run this AI rule sync command, which generates all the stuff. Again, you can have a configuration file for rule sync in the root of your repo. I'm trying to minimize the number of config files that we have. So I just did this in line, but you can basically run that command like on post install and it generates everything for you, which is pretty cool. So like if you look at the small code base, like I'm able to git ignore all this stuff related to like open code and Claude and Codex. The agents MD is git ignored, which is kind of cool. Yeah, and you would basically just npm install, and you'll see that this will just run and it'll generate anything that's missing. The only problem is obviously you have to like run install to get it to be there. So if somebody adds a rule and you pull their changes, I mean, I guess you could add it as like a Git hook, so to speak, but yeah, that's one cool thing I did to clean up all the packages, or sorry, the root of the repository, because it was getting a little bit of a mess with all these config files. Obviously, you can like make a config directory and move these things around, but some of these things I think make sense to live in the root of the repo. And the other thing is I added a very simple Ralph harness to the project. So we've got like our Ralph auto prompt, a script for Ralph here, and then the progress file. I think that there's still a little bit of work to be done because it's not perfect yet. Like it's still, you have to really tune Ralph, in my experience, for the project that you're working on and give it like really good context. So it still doesn't perform well in this particular project. So like I'm doing some tuning to the context it has available. But yeah, I thought it's kind of nice to be able to have that in the small repo when you're working on a particular thing. What is your opinion on Oxy versus Biome? I love Oxy. I don't like Biome because I think that they are, and I don't like it as a to use it. I don't like to say I don't like it as a project. I think like Biome was an inspiration for Oxy as I understand it, or Ox format as I understand it. So like the value in the project is not what I don't like. I think that those developers are doing a wonderful job. I just don't like how prescriptive Biome is. With Oxlint, I have full control again, and it integrates really nicely with previous rules that we had in ESLint, which I think is super important. Like some people like the low config overhead of Biome, and that's fine. But I just really like still being able to configure everything the way I want with Oxlint. We're not using Ox format yet, which I think is why the comparison that you're asking me to make is hard. We're still using dprint, which is another Rust-based JavaScript formatting project. And we used to use dprint through our ESLint configuration. So if you look at like the v3 repo, you'll see we had like a custom plugin. Where is it? In here, I scroll to the bottom. We had a custom plugin that I built, which runs dprint with these settings. So we simplified in v4 to use Oxlint for linting, dprint for formatting, and it's extremely fast, like really fast. First time I've heard about dprint. Yeah, dprint is great. The reason why we like dprint over like Oxlint format or Biome or whatever, one of the main reasons, it sounds dumb, but like we've gotten so used to it that we like it, is it has support for context-aware formatting. What I mean by that is, let's say like, I don't know, export const choices or colors. Schema dot literal red, blue, green, yellow, indigo. I don't know, right? Like, sorry, in 4.0, this is an array. This is all well and good, I think. This is literals. This is all well and good, but let's say I wanted to format it on each one on a separate line. In Biome, like, I don't think it's possible. You have to like insert comments and like other characters to try to force it to do that. In dprint, I can just go to a new line and hit and reformat, and it just lets me do it. It's like context-aware formatting. It's super nice. So like you can force it to format things the way that you want, which I really like. How are the format files feature with Oxy stuff? I don't know about Benzer because again, we're using dprint for formatting. What's your personal AI workflow and how often do you use the Ralph approach? If I have a larger feature I'm working on where I need to create multiple specs, because again, Ralph works well when like your specs are very targeted and very detailed. And like you give really good context to the agent because every time it invokes the coding agent, it has a fresh context. It loads in what it needs. So like you have to really work to make sure that the harness has everything that it needs to function properly. Good feedback loop, like really good context, a well-formed spec. So if I'm willing to do all that, usually it's for like a larger feature that I'm working on. And that's that's where I tend to leverage Ralph. If it's something smaller, I'll usually just be in Claude, or I wish I could use open code. I know you can use open code with the Claude models, but I don't want to get myself banned for some reason, and I'm just like neurotic about that sort of thing. So I'm using Claude right now. But yeah, that's kind of like my decision point is like for larger features, I tend to use Ralph. For smaller things, I tend to just be in the coding agent. I also use the coding agent, by the way. I work with the coding agent to generate specs for Ralph. Like to generate those specs. And then I like review the spec and like I'll talk with the agent about like how I want to change things about the spec. And yeah, it's a super interesting workflow. It's very weird to not be like writing code manually as much. It's like very strange. Like orchestrating coding agents instead of like writing the actual code is like a very strange thing. Oxlint, forlint, and dprint for formatting. Do you still use TSGO in the team, or still TS server with the effect LSP? We use TS server for local development. So for like like in the editor, we still use the TS server because the TSGO doesn't have support for plugins yet. That being said, Mattia's currently working on getting the Effect LSP stuff ported to V4. So we still don't have like Effect LSP stuff in the editor, but we are using like TS server in the editor for stuff. But in our CI, so if I go to GitHub, I migrated us over to TSGO. Well, Sebastian and I migrated us over to TSGO a little while ago, and it's fantastic. So basically, we use TSGO for builds in CI for build stuff. I don't know if we use it for our snapshots. Do we? Yeah, we do. Because we basically Sebastian actually created a bunch of PRs against TSGO to fix things in TSGO that were causing us problems specifically. So we got it to the point where it affect like in V4 builds the way that we needed to, or the way that we want, like to be basically to get TSGO to parity on some of the features we needed. So things that like worked with TSC that didn't work in TSGO yet, or things that he fixed. So yeah, we're using it in CI for builds and for our checks. TSGO. And it's great because our CI times are substantially reduced. If you look at like some recent, the check step here, you'll see like we are to build the full effect v4 repository takes 15 seconds, and half of that is, I mean, like, part of that is probably just like, I don't know, loading the binary. I don't know. But yeah, it's super fast. 15 seconds to build this whole project is fantastic. So pretty great. What I love about this new orchestration workflow, yeah, we did the same thing, whereas TS code only for CI/CD. Yeah, so but Benzer, we're doing the same thing. What I love about this new orchestration workflow is that you don't really need to care that much about learning the syntax and details of the API surface of things. I'm currently teaching myself Terraform and Kubernetes, and not having to fully learn HashiCorp configuration language is a blessing. I agree with that, Kidam. I think that sentiment is one of the things that I'm really enjoying about working with LLMs a lot. Is you can learn really fast. You don't have to be like an expert right away. Like, you can actually become productive on things. Like, for example, I'll show you something really dumb, but it's useful for me. I wrote myself a NeoVim plugin, which I never thought I would do. I wrote none of this code. I wrote absolutely zero of this project here. I wrote none of this. But the existing Git worktree plugins that like, for example, the Primogen, and then there's like a fork of that one, and then there's like another version, they didn't have the workflow that I wanted. Where, like, in my editor, for example, I can just go like git worktree new. I still have like one error that I'm trying to fix. I haven't really done it, but I can just like look at the work trees that I have and create new ones. Which is useful for, like, again, prototyping with AI. I can swap between work trees and like have different agents running in different work trees in my repos. And I know that like conductor exists and whatnot, but again, like, I have a particular workflow that I enjoy, and I didn't want to sacrifice that. So I worked with an LLM to build this whole project. And again, I don't know how to write a NeoVim plugin. I have no idea how these APIs work. But I was able to like create specs and drive this thing with Ralph to the point where it's working, and it integrates really nicely with Snacks, which is the one of the like it's the telescope equivalent. The Snacks picker is the telescope equivalent that I'm using. Yeah. So anyway, I think that with that, if there are no more questions about effect or effect related things, I'll probably finish up here. But I missed your question, Jay. I'm sorry. What was your question? What's a good approach for handling logging HTTP requests? There's actually an example of that, I think, in the README of like having a middleware, a logging middleware. Share. Effect. Packages. Platform. Log. So HTTP middleware.logger is like our default implementation here. So you can use this to log stuff, but it logs like a very specific set of things. You can look at the implementation of this if you want to like modify the behavior and have your own middleware logger. But there's also HTTP middleware. The example in the README for defining middleware is literally a logger middleware, where you can define. Can I use that in an HTTP client? No. This is for HTTP API. I don't know if we have the concept of like client middleware for outgoing requests. Mattia, do you know off the top of your head? I don't think we do. You can use you can use HTTP client transform client with so hang on. I can sort of try to show an example of this. I do something like that. It's not logging, but I transform the. Yeah, Mattia. I think that's probably the best approach here. Is we don't have like the concept of middleware for outgoing requests because that doesn't really make a ton of sense. But like what you can do is OpenAI source. We'll look at like these clients here. So you can see here, I'm grabbing the base HTTP client here by yielding it. And then I immediately map the outgoing request. And I pipe the request to different like methods that we have on HTTP client request. One of which is, I think we have like a map effect TS, where you could like map the request and log whatever you want. So it's nothing like by default that we have, but you have the ability to manipulate the request in an effectful way. Platform, not API client. I want just HTTP client. Yeah, map request effect allows you to map the request and do something effectful. You can tap the request in this case, which probably is what you want, because you don't want to really modify the request. You just want to get access to it and log some stuff. So you could do that. You could also transform the response. There's like a bunch of methods on the HTTP client. So instead of like, I would reframe it in like the way what you're trying to do, instead of thinking of it like middleware, think of it like something that like a side effect you're trying to execute. At the very least, I can look at the implementation of API middleware logger. Yeah, but again, Jay, that is for HTTP API. Like that's server stuff. That's stuff you would be running on the server, not an HTTP client. For the we don't have the concept of client middleware. You would either transform the request or tap the request and like do the logging yourself. That's why I say you probably want to look at like tap request or some of these mapping functions. All right, folks. Thank you all very much for hanging out today. Hopefully we'll be back next week. I think Kit will be back by then. And I hope you all had a wonderful day. Have a wonderful day. And hope you enjoyed the stream. I'll see you all next time. Cheers, everyone.